U.S. inquiry. The U.S. investigation, which lasted from April 19 to May 25, 1912, was led by Sen. William Alden Smith. In all, more than 80 people were interviewed. Notable witnesses included Second Officer Charles Lightoller, the most senior officer to survive. He defended the actions of his superiors, especially Captain Smith's refusal to decrease the ship's speed. Many passengers testified to the general confusion on the ship. A general warning was never sounded, causing a number of passengers and even crew members to be unaware of the danger for some time. In addition, because a scheduled lifeboat drill had never been held, the lowering of the boats was often haphazard. Perhaps the most scrutinized testimony came from the crew of the Californian, who claimed their ship was some 20 nautical miles, 37 kilometers, from the Titanic. Crew members saw a ship but said it was too small to be the Titanic. They also stated that it was moving and that efforts to contact it by Morse lamp were unsuccessful. After sighting rockets in the distance, the crew informed Captain Stanley Lord, who had retired for the night. Instead of ordering the ship's wireless operator to turn on the radio, Lord instead told the men to continue to use the Morse lamp. By 2 a.m. the nearby ship had reportedly sailed away. In the end, the U.S. investigation faulted the British Board of Trade, to whose laxity of regulation and hasty inspection the world is largely indebted for this awful fatality. Other contributing causes were also noted, including the failure of Captain Smith to slow the Titanic after receiving ice warnings. However, perhaps the strongest criticism was levied at Captain Lord and the Californian. The committee found that the ship was nearer the Titanic than the 19 miles reported by her captain, and that her officers and crew saw the distress signals of the Titanic and failed to respond to them in accordance with the dictates of humanity, international usage, and the requirements of law. British inquiry. In May 1912 the British inquiry began. It was overseen by the British Board of Trade, the same agency that had been derided by U.S. investigators for the insufficient lifeboat requirements. The presiding judge was Sir John Charles Bigham, Lord Mersey. Little new evidence was discovered during the 28 days of testimony. The final report stated that the loss of the said ship was due to collision with an iceberg, brought about by the excessive speed at which the ship was being navigated. However, Mersey also stated that he was not able to blame Captain Smith. He was doing only that which other skilled men would have done in the same position. Captain Lord and the Californian, however, drew sharp rebuke. The British investigators claimed that the liner was some 5 to 10 nautical miles, 9 to 19 kilometers, from the Titanic and that she might have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost. Both the U.S. and British investigations also proposed various safety recommendations, and in 1913 the first International Conference for Safety of Life at Sea was called in London. The conference drew up rules requiring that every ship have lifeboat space for each person embarked, that lifeboat drills be held for each voyage, and, because the Californian had not heard the distress signals of the Titanic, that ships maintain a 24-hour radio watch. The International Ice Patrol was established to warn ships of icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes and to break up ice. The Californian incident. The U.S. and British inquiries did little to end speculation and debate concerning the sinking of the Titanic. Particular focus centered on the Californian. Supporters of Lord, nicknamed Lordites, believed that the captain had been unfairly criticized. They held that a third ship, possibly the Samson, a Norwegian boat illegally hunting seals, was between the Leyland liner and the Titanic. That view eventually gained much support. Crew members of the Californian did not hear rockets being fired, though the sounds would have been audible if the ship had been within the distances claimed by U.S. and British investigators. In addition, people aboard the Titanic stated that a vessel was headed in their direction, which could not have been Californian, which was stopped at the time. While the true location of the Californian will likely never be conclusively known, many experts believe it was actually some 20 miles, 37 kilometers, away and would not have reached the Titanic before it sank. However, Lord has continued to draw criticism for his failure to take more action in response to the distress signals. Discovery. Within days of the Titanic's sinking, talk began of finding the wreck. Given the limits of technology, however, serious attempts were not undertaken until the second half of the 20th century. In August 1985, Robert Ballard, working with the Institut Français de Recherche pour l'exploitation de la mer, IFRAMER, French Research Institute for the Exploitation of the Sea, led an expedition from aboard the U.S. Navy research ship Nor. The quest was partly a means for testing the Argo, a 16-foot, 5-meter, submersible sled equipped with a remote-controlled camera that could transmit live images to a monitor. The submersible was sent some 13,000 feet, 4,000 meters, to the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, sending video back to the Nor. On September 1, 1985, the first underwater images of the Titanic were recorded as its giant boilers were discovered. Later video showed the ship lying upright in two pieces. While the bow was clearly recognizable, the stern section was severely damaged. Covering the wreckage were rust-colored stalactite-like formations. Scientists later determined that the rusticles, as they were named, were created by iron-eating microorganisms, which are consuming the wreck. By 2019 there was a shocking level of deterioration, and a number of notable features, such as the captain's bathtub, were gone. The Titanic, located at about 41 degrees 43 feet 57 inches N, 49 degrees 56 feet 49 inches W, bow section, some 13 nautical miles, 24 kilometers, from the position given in its distress signals, was explored numerous times by manned and unmanned submersibles. The expeditions found no sign of the long gash previously thought to have been ripped in the ship's hull by the iceberg. Scientists instead discovered that the collision's impact had produced a series of thin gashes as well as brittle fracturing and separation of seams in the adjacent hull plates, thus allowing water to flood in and sink the ship. In subsequent years, examination of the wreckage, as well as paperwork in the builder's archives, led to speculation that low-quality steel or weak rivets may have contributed to the Titanic's sinking. Anti-facts: the discovery of the Titanic in 1985 began a debate over the retrieval of artifacts. Some believe that the wreckage, the grave to more than 1,000 people, should be left undisturbed. Others, however, cite the historical value of raising items from the ocean floor. In 1987, the American company Titanic Ventures, Inc., later renamed RMS Titanic, Inc., RMST, with the assistance of IFREMER and the U.S. Navy, salvaged some 1,800 artifacts, including a pair of glasses, a whiskey bottle, and a leather valise. Later that year, a number of the items appeared in the TV movie Return to the Titanic live, and a safe from the wreck was opened on live television. In 1992, the salvager Merex, Inc., asked a U.S. court to grant it ownership of the wreckage. RMST contested the claim, sparking a legal battle. 2 years later, the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia granted exclusive salvage rights to RMST. In the ensuing years, the company continued to retrieve artifacts, many of which formed the basis for touring exhibits. In addition, several sites were established for the permanent display of Titanic items. In 2000, RMST sought to sell artifacts, a violation of the salvage terms. Although the court rejected the initial proposal, a deal was ultimately approved in 2011. As part of the decision, any sale of Titanic items had to meet certain conditions, which had been created in conjunction with the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the U.S. Department of Justice. Items soon went up for auction, and collectors paid huge sums for a piece of maritime history. In the 21st century, salvage expeditions largely stopped. This development was due, in part, to various efforts to preserve the decaying wreckage, which is littered with debris and has suffered damage after being hit by submersibles. Notably, in 2012 the Titanic became subject to the Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage, 2001. Although the United States did not sign that treaty, it has undertaken its own efforts to protect the site. In 1986, it passed the RMS Titanic Memorial Maritime Act, which treated the wreckage as a gravesite and sought to regulate activities related to the ship. In 2023, the act was mentioned by the U.S. government in its attempt to halt an RMST expedition to obtain items. In 2024, RMST conducted a mission to the wreckage, its first in some 14 years. However, because of the federal lawsuit, no artifacts were retrieved. The company instead took more than 2 million photographs and discovered that part of the bow's railing had collapsed. In addition, a bronze statuette of the goddess Diana, which had been in the first-class lounge, was located on the ocean floor. The artwork had not been seen since 1986. Tourism in the late 1990s. Tourists began visiting the wreckage, and a new industry was launched. Early visitors paid up to $36,000, about $61,450 in 2024, for a seat on a submersible. By the early 2020s, the cost had risen to about $250,000. In June 2023, tragedy struck when Titan, an experimental submersible carrying tourists, imploded during its descent. 5 people were killed, including Stockton Rush, the co-founder of OceanGate Expeditions, the owner of the submersible. Popple sculpture. Countless renditions, interpretations, and analyses of the Titanic disaster transformed the ship into a cultural icon. In addition to being the subject of numerous books, the ship has inspired various movies, notably A Night to Remember, 1958, and James Cameron's blockbuster Titanic, 1997. In addition, there have been numerous TV projects, including a 2012 miniseries written by Julian Fellowes. Several museums dedicated to the liner draw thousands of visitors each year. In 2012, the 100th anniversary of the ship's sinking, Titanic Belfast opened on the site of Harland and Wolff's former shipyard, and it became one of the city's most popular tourist attractions. Although the wreck of the Titanic will eventually deteriorate, the famed liner seems unlikely to fade from the public imagination.